All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for waiting for this exciting conclusion to our talk about visualizing statistics and graphs. I'm Eric Ragan. I'm going to be presenting work that I did with John Goodall, my colleague at Oak Ridge, as well as with our student Albert Tung, who was interning with us last summer. So this work is about using information visualization and visual analytics tools, but not just for the point of understanding the data and getting to the end results, but for figuring out how to remember what you did to get there. So this is a big difference, right? Usually when people talk about information visualization, the focus is on studying how to improve insight, how to improve the quality of findings. But there's more to it than that. There are a lot of situations where it's going to be important to be able to understand what you did to get there. How did data change over the course of your investigation? What were the actions that you took to get there? And could you do this again at a later time if you had to? So a lot of different purposes for when these things are going to be important. Like if your analysis task is interrupted and you have to pick it up again later. So this happens quite a bit for even if you're in your office in a single session, you're interrupted by a colleague for a few minutes. Or if you're doing some type of time sharing on HPC systems, and you might have to wait for weeks or even months to be able to get your next stage of analysis. Obviously, it's going to be important for replication or reproduction of your analysis to be able to assess the validity of your results and try to get the results again, or to apply the same method that you took to a different situation, different data set. Then, of course, communication is always huge. Whether it's communicating to a colleague during a collaborative analysis exercise, or when you're trying to make a presentation to maybe your boss, or even to the general public, a storytelling type approach, explaining what the data means, what it is. So there are a lot of different purposes for why this analytic provenance, this history of the analysis, is going to be important. And for that reason, we got a lot of visualization tools that are designed to help people to help capture this information and visualize it, help people to remember what the analysis process was. So in our work, we're focusing on trying to understand and evaluate whether these tools, these visualizations of process, are any good. So now we have an evaluation issue. How do we know that the tools are good to help people remember, to recall what they did? So ideally, if you have real people using tools, you can give the people the tools, and after a while you get a sense of, do they like it? How are they using it? Are they happy with those tools for real results? But even then, you're missing some points about the specific design features, what visual aspects, what interaction techniques are truly beneficial in making differences for performance. So in our work, we're looking at controlled experiments of what different visual properties influence differences in recall of the process. And we're focusing on a specific type of visual history of the process. So this is an example here of spatial visual history, in which you're mapping the different stages of analysis to different locations in space. This seems like a pretty intuitive way of doing it, taking advantage of things like the method of loci, spatial memory, combining information features of location and visual components to help you combine and make sense of metadata about the steps of the process. And in theory, you can refer to these locations and help remember what you did to get from place to place. So in this study, we looked at how much visual detail is necessary and what level of visual detail helps. So it's really quite a pain to collect a lot of data about the process in certain scenarios, especially depending on what that type of data is. So in a lot of cases, especially if you're getting user data from the people about their rationale or intentions or actions, it's going to be to your benefit if you can reduce the amount that you have to capture and then display. These problems become even more important when you're looking at big data scenarios where you don't want to have to save lots of data. You just want to be able to help people remember what they did along the way. And then, of course, for looking at the level of visual detail in different resolution displays, portability becomes an issue. Right, so if I'm having an analysis session, then I walk down the hall and pull up my visualization that I was looking on my phone, you're not going to quickly have that same level of detail that you were looking at on a large display system or even on your desktop computer. So our goal is to evaluate level of visual detail, and to do this, we need an analysis activity. So for our study, we looked at a vast challenge data set from 2010, and this involves a number of data sets. The one that we focused on was a body of text documents, which was bigger than 100 documents, but we reduced it to 100 documents just to simplify the task for a single session user study. And it involved the trade of arms dealings and the spread of disease. How people were getting sick, there are different types of illegal activities, bank transactions, people were traveling, and a lot of illegal activity going on. And the goal was to find the relationship between these activities. So now to the good stuff. This is the analysis tool that we use for this study. And as you can see here, we have this spatial distribution that's supported, where you see individual rectangles correspond to the documents. You can collapse the documents, open them up, move them around to arrange spatial organizations, and add visual markup like highlighting different areas, add annotations to add different notes during the analysis, make connections and highlight things, search for things. And what this does is it gives people the opportunity to create their own visual history. It's an automatic capture mechanism for recording the process, because the final result, whatever the current result is, it's going to contain visual clues of what that process was, what actions you took previously to get the visualization in the visual workspace to the current state. So here's an example of the workspace at the beginning of the analysis. The top view has roughly 5 categories of documents that are basically grouped on the type of information. So in this case, maybe phone intercepts, email intercepts, web articles, bank transactions, that type of thing. And then they move it and get to a point where at the bottom by the time they're done. So we ran a controlled experiment where we looked at 4 levels of visual detail. And we had them use this entire tool on a 2-monitor display. 2 monitors were each 24 inches. And at the end of this analysis, we asked them to recall their process. And this was pretty tedious. We asked them to verbally to walk through the process step by step by step. So what was the first thing you did? Well, I searched for Nigeria. And then what did you do? Well, then I looked at all those documents and I came to this conclusion. No, let's go back to what you did after you searched in Nigeria. What did you look at? And then what did you do? And I searched for this. So it's quite painful, but you get a lot of data about the process that you can use for evaluation later. So the full analysis session was done with the tool at full detail, but then we reduced the level of detail when we asked them questions and had them walk through that process. 4 levels of visual detail. Okay, the highest level of visual detail was full detail, which is, as you would expect, full. The same level of detail, you get all the visual markup that was present during the analysis session. So all the highlighting, all the text, everything is the same. Compare this to the moderate level of detail, the next level, we start removing information. Only the visual markup that the user added themselves remains, right? So we have titles remain, but other than that, it's only highlighting and connections and locations, only things that the person added. Take this a step lower. Next level of detail. All the text is gone. All you can see is location, visual cues, the visual state of the environment. So you're still getting some kind of context of what you were working on and what your environment looked like. But all the real data is gone. And finally, that was 3 levels. There was one additional lower level of detail. It's a very subtle difference, so pay attention here, see if you could spot it. This is the no detail level. So that's just this black screens. So those are the 4 levels of detail. Now, how did this work? We did a 2-session study because we wanted to also evaluate effects of delays over periods of time. In the first session, the participant came in, we taught them how to use the tool, how to do analysis in general. We encouraged them to rely on searching rather than trying to just read through all these documents. And then they did the analysis task. It was 40 minutes. And at that point, at the end of the time limit, all interactivity stopped, and the state of the display changed to the appropriate level of detail for that experimental condition. They explained their verbal walk through the process, and that was it. It should be noted that we didn't tell participants ahead of time that the point of this was going to be explain the process, because we didn't want to distract from the focus is doing the analysis, a real analysis, and figuring out what's going on in the data set. A week later, the participant came back, and they had to walk through the analysis again, using the same level of detail. So they didn't have to redo the analysis, they just had to do the verbal walkthrough again. It should be noted that this is a between subjects design, because a person can only do this analysis one time. Of course, obviously, they're going to know what's going on again. So each person did 1 level of detail. For data collection and the evaluation methodology, we recorded with audio and video during the analysis, as well as capturing screenshots of what was going on for the participant during the analysis session. And we encouraged think aloud protocol, which means we kept bugging people when they were quiet for any more than 30 seconds, just so they could keep talking and explaining what they were doing. In addition to that, we captured system logs to capture event activities, things like highlighting and searches, even movement of documents, so that we were able to have a full record of everything. This is redundant, but that was kind of the point. We wanted to make sure we were able to thoroughly analyze what people were doing so that we can study it later on. Later, we went through and we had two coders review both all of this data alongside the verbal walkthroughs that participants provided. And they provided and each coder provided a score for every participant. So in case you're wondering if that's tedious, yes it is. You have to review all of that information for every participant, both on what they really did and listen to their explanation. So I will say that we did look at inter-rater reliability, and it was extremely high. We did not look at agreement, which means the exact score, the exact number that people came up with. That's not really the most important thing. We just want to make sure that scores are relatively high or low per participant. So jumping through the results of what we found here. This is pretty straightforward about what you would expect. The light bars show what happens 1 week later, while the dark bars show what happens in the immediate recall session. So as you expect, there's a little bit of a drop 1 week later in the amount that you remember. And over time, so that would drop. And depending on the level of detail, people will remember more things about the process. The interesting things to note is that the effect is fairly strong. The full levels of detail will get a 40% increase in the score, and even the low level of detail will get about a 25% bump, which is substantial. More importantly, we did notice that we had some different types of metrics here. This is an overall score, which when we did the scoring, we had a few different things people looked at. Capturing the main themes, getting the details of the steps that you did, getting the ordering right, because sometimes people jumble things. This is for the overall scores. I'm going to jump to a very similar image for main theme scores, just to show that pretty much all of these metrics had very similar results. This one in particular, I wanted to note for main themes, the important thing is that there was a significant increase or benefit of the low detail condition, which is kind of neat when you think about it, that even this low level of detail, where you're hiding all of the data, that's still significantly better than having no visual aid. So not only are you getting benefit of just the final state of the visual space, take away all the information, all the data, and you're just left with the context, the visual clues. And that still helped. But it's even more than that when you consider that this is really the best case scenario of getting this level of visual context. People didn't have to highlight, didn't have to move things around, they didn't have to make connections. They could do whatever they want, and a lot of people didn't do all those things. So here are some examples. Here are two screenshots from two people in this low detail condition. These were their visual aids at the end. So this top participant, he's really rocking the visualization tool. He's making notes, he's moving things around, making connections, annotating things all over the place, highlighting, and that gives me a great screenshot to include in the presentation. So that guy's my friend, right? He does a great job taking advantage of the tools to use a nice, very informative visual history at the end. Compare this to the final state of another participant. That participant didn't really do much at all, right? They moved a couple documents around, which is something, but mostly they clicked through one document at a time, opening and closing it. So this was kind of scary when we started to see this behavior, because we thought that these effects of these bottom people, the people who weren't really getting the high level of visual markup, we thought that there would be no effects, no value of that visual aid, and that could maybe wash out any value of people who are using this space. But still, with those people combined in the combination, there was still a significant benefit there. So unfortunately, remember, this is only one experimental condition, so we didn't have enough data to really do a really thorough analysis of all the different behaviors and patterns of all the approaches that people did. But we'd love to do that in the future, because it would be pretty cool to understand how that influenced the benefits of these types of visualizations. So to wrap up, if we're trying to understand if the final visual history, the final view of the workspace is enough to help you remember what you did to get there, it does. It is. We did it. We can go home now. No, it's a start. And it's going to be really beneficial if we can find ways to increase the benefit for a recall while lowering the amount of capture that's going to be necessary. So we have a lot of more work that we want to do in trying to figure out how much detail do you really need to capture. Does it matter depending on the purpose for your presentation or your recall, your communication? And are different types of visual markup going to be more beneficial for this memory? And then, of course, we also want to look at things that are more complicated types of analysis that look at different types of more interactive scenarios. So rather than just having a single static image, if you give people some more flexibility, is that going to help them or hurt them? It's going to give people more power to explore the data and the process, but that's also more difficult to do. So simple is often better if we want to explore those trade-offs. So I'll stop there, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Paul from Postech. When I see your work, like people might really want to have the annotation, like conceptual level of the information instead of that all the details of the annotation. So if I want to develop that kind of system, then what kind of things should be considered? You might have thought about that.
So we have a little bit. I think that depends on the purpose. What are people going to want? It depends on what they're going to use it for. And I think that's definitely something you have to keep in mind.
Sorry, I cannot hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I not in the mic anymore? It depends on the purpose. Understanding what people are going to want to use that data for is going to drive your choices for what you need to capture and represent.
What I thought, the scenario I thought is like when they record and explain their steps, they don't think all the details. I
Right.
thought in that way, and then like they explain what I did in this document, and then they more like remember why they did, and then they explain those things. Then in that case, instead of all the details I tagged, it's better to have the summaries of the actions like that. So
I
that's
agree.
what I thought.
And something that I'm really interested in doing is looking at using analytics tools to help capture those higher level themes, what those main categories of interactions are. What are your hypotheses of this group of actions? What does that mean? And is there a way to abstract that and visualize that? So maybe you can superimpose such a visualization within the workspace in a way that makes sense, or add additional metadata, process metadata to the environment, or maybe it has to be a separate visualization. But yeah, that's something that's definitely interesting.
Okay, thank you.
James Egan, Telecom Paritech. Thank you very much. That was a nice talk. I really enjoyed the use of the spatialization, and it made me think of just when you read a book, you oftentimes have this notion of, the thing that I'm trying to remember was on the bottom left of the page towards the beginning. And so I was wondering if maybe even just the fact that you have some sort of a spatial layout was probably enough. You mentioned that you were going to try and tease that out in future work. But one of the things that I was thinking might also be interesting is to look at some of the visual memory arts. There was a talk yesterday by Simon Perrault on using that for memorizing abstract command mappings. And some of that might actually just trying to guide the user in the analysis task to construct some sort of a mental image of...
Absolutely. I think that's a really fun area where it depends on the behavior and the strategy that people take. And then you have the trade-offs of what the participant or what the analyst wants to do based on their familiarity versus what you can train them to do, and see if there are benefits when you train them to take advantage of tools in certain ways that you could get real observable outcomes that could be beneficial in the long run. Yeah, thank you.
Excuse me. Is your question short?
It doesn't have to be asked. It's okay.
I see people want to go to lunch and maybe they have appointments. Thank you very much. And thanks all the speakers again.